Yeah, there you go.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to our brown bag program today. We're glad to have Bob Woods speak on a tragic Civil War history from our local area. Bob has given a number of talks here. He's on the board of the Goshenhofen Historians and president of the New Hanover Historical Society. So he's done a great deal of local research. And I just want to mention before Bob begins his talk, we have a number of exciting programs coming up. And our largest event is June 2nd and 3rd. It's the Penn Dry Goods Market. Please check our website. We have some really interesting lectures for people to participate in. June 14th is the next brown bag, and that topic is the Philadelphia Great Wagon Road by Ed Johnson. And if you haven't checked out our exhibit on Hartramp and the Schwenkfelder experience in the Civil War, which is right on the other side of the doors, please look at that today. That is going to be only on exhibit until May 15th. And our next exhibits are a photography exhibit by Steve Pestrock that's opening June 15th. And then we're all looking forward to an exhibit, The Culinary Journey from Germany to Pennsylvania. And that's going to be opening July 25th. So we have a busy time ahead. Please join us whenever you can. Bob?
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Well, I'm Bob Wood, and this is a sad story. This whole story should never have happened, and it should not have come down this way, the way it did. That was then, and this is now, but I think the same thing kind of happens over and over and over again nowadays. But anyway, it's a local story, and it's one that's little known, and it's very interesting. So off we go. We found his gravesite, William Howe's. Reverend Heckler and another volunteer, Jen Bandura, and I scouted out his gravesite. It's in Upper Frederick Township, off of Snyder Road. I mean, you wouldn't know where it is, you wouldn't know where it was. You almost need a guide to find yourself, find your way. It's back off the road, through the brush, in the corner of an overgrown field. But it's there, and there it is. Now, where we're talking about the location, it's at the intersection of Snyder and Howe Road. On the map there, we're in New Hanover Township, right along the border with Upper Frederick Township, and that's where he lived. And that just to get oriented, that's where we are. I forgot my laser pointer as usual, but you can get oriented pretty well there. You've got the reservoirs up there. You see up in the very up right corner is Red Hill. And so we're down sort of south a few miles from the reservoir. And there we are. It's the address is Perkiomenville, but it's not really a Perkiomenville.
Would you like a pointer? I can give you one.
Yeah, somewhere along the line it might be useful. Okay, let's see. Indeed. Okay, thank you, Beth. So, Civil War, most of us are familiar. Civil War, 1861 to 1864. It was a really bad war, as we know. William Howe shot Abraham Bartolet, or Bertolet. Bertolets and Bertolets, originally they were French Huguenots in Berks County. Around Abraham's grandfather moved down to Upper Frederick, married into the Fry family, and had many children. And that's how the Bertolets came down into Upper Frederick and New Hanover. And William Howe shot Abraham Bartolet. He was dead from the moment he shot Bertolet, because the Bertolets were a powerful, well-known, and well-respected family in the area. He shot the wrong one. They came to, well, it's a long story, I'll get to it. But Bertolet was the wrong one to shoot. And he says, the little inscription, it says, tombstones, his grave is in Pottstown, and his grave marker says, "More than life, a patriot, his country doth love. Here rests his body, his soul, in peace dwells above." And his wife, who was Elmira Sands, is there with him. "Shun this place, O man, whosoever thou art." It's a Civil War graffiti on casement 11. There was a letter from William Howe, imprisoned in Fort Mifflin, to President Lincoln, August 23rd, 1863. He had been arrested. He said to Lincoln, "And then they caught me and took me to Philadelphia and put me in a cell about 8 feet long and about 4 feet wide. I am almost smottered in here, and I'm now 6 weeks in, and there's no air coming in at all, and dark. So if he would come here like a man, he could catch me, but not like a murderer. And this I can prove by a dozen of witnesses." So we're dealing here with someone who is not sophisticated in legal matters or any other matters. He was a working man, a laborer from Perkiomenville all his life, and he never understood the legal system, and he never had proper legal representation, I think. Fort Mifflin that's a Revolutionary War fort in Delaware, and it was used during the Civil War, converted to a prison. In August of 2006, Wayne Irby, Fort Mifflin's project manager, was cutting the grass when his foot sank down about a foot into a sinkhole. He stopped his mower and started digging. He had discovered the entryway to a series of underground bomb-proofs hidden for more than a century. But built during the Revolutionary War, 2 rooms called Casement 11 were first used to store powder and munitions during the war. During the 1800s, 3 more rooms were added. The 5 chambers served as a prison during the Civil War. Unseen for 130 years, names and graffiti are scrawled and carved in the walls and doors. And note the German H in the signature above. It looks like sort of like a 9. William H. Howe. So I'll skip over that. Much of what I got here comes from the book Stop the Evil by Robert Alada. You may be familiar with this book. If you're familiar with this book, then you have about half of my presentation, because that's the best and most authoritative and researched piece on the William Howe story. And anything that is to be found, Robert Alada found. I have some other things, but most of what we have comes from that book. How many of you know that book, just out of curiosity? Okay, yeah, good, yeah. Okay, more things about it. William H. Howe. William Henry Howe married Hannah Shaner in March of 1860 at New Hanover Lutheran Church. She was a step sibling, about 8 years his senior. His father died and his mother remarried a Shaner. When Howe's father died, his mother, Catherine, married Charles Shaner. Both widow and widower had several children previously, and Howe married one of the Shaner children. Dr. Alada's book claims that Hannah bought with her a dowry of $1,500 in personal property and $450 in cash. On March 3rd, 1862, Hannah Howe bought 6 acres of land and a house at the intersection of Houck and Snyder Roads on the border between Frederick and New Hanover Township. The house was bought with her money. There's from a newspaper article of the day, is a picture of the house. That is believed to be the house where these events occurred. That house is on the site today. In the cellar of that house, or in the basement, some of the old walls still exist of the original house that was on that site. William and Hannah had 2 children. Charles Taylor Howe married Emily someone, reported to be an apprentice tailor. He's buried in Norristown. And William married Laura Bennett, listed as a farm laborer. Hannah lived with him and died November 4th, 1909. She's buried in Riverside Cemetery, Norristown. Hannah had moved to Norristown in 1870 and lived with William, one of her children, after the events of the story that we're getting to. There's the house today. Who were Howe's family and where did they live? The Howe, H-O-W-E name is English, and that does not appear much in local records. It's an English name in the Pennsylvania Dutch area. Since we know Howe's mother is named Catherine, the New Hanover Lutheran marriage record of Catherine Bartman to Henry Howe, H-A-U, April 3rd, 1825, likely names William's parents. A curious typewritten baptismal record at Peace and Zion, that's Keeler's Church. This Henry William Hawn, H-A-N, son of Johannes Henry and Catherine Hawn. Born on July 26, 1839, and baptized November 17, 1839. Daniel and Maria Bartman were the sponsors. Probably Ray Hollenbach, who miscopied a lowercase German U as an N, the two letters being almost indistinguishable since Hawn is a common name in the area. Yeah, he called it Hawn, H-A-N, and it was probably H-A-U. And we don't have the originals anymore. All we have is the typescript from Ray Hollenbach, who translated and typed the old German script methods, wording, letters, words into modern English. And probably they then threw the originals out because Reverend Heckler and I went out to the Reformed archives don't get old, never get old. Words do not come to you. Lancaster. The Reformed archives in Lancaster looking for the originals to see if it was H-A-U or H-A-N, and they didn't have them either. So long story short, that's probably what it was. Not that it matters too much for our story, but it's H-A-U is the original German spelling. And probably when he signed up in the military, when he went to the army, somebody signed him in. What's your name? Howe. Okay, H-O-W-E. And they used the English spelling probably. It says also New Hanover Lutheran records the marriage of Charles Shaner to Catherine Howe, 1844, another variant of Howe. Yeah, that was his mother and his stepfather then. Okay, Frederick Township tax records, 1836, 37, and 38. John Henry Howe, probably William's father, paid occupation tax, no property. 60 and 61, John Howe is listed as a laborer. 62, William Howe is listed as owning 6 acres with occupation as laborer. In 63, William Howe estate that was left with 3 acres. So they were, we might call them common, but they were ordinary laborers without resources and probably relatively uneducated. Now, Hannah Shaner, that's William's wife, mother was Catherine Krebs, daughter of tavern owner Henry Krebs. That's Krebs Tavern. That's a very historic place. It's still there. It's at the intersection of a big road or Route 73 and New Hanover Square Road. Perhaps you're familiar with the building. It's painted gray now. It's in apartments, but it is the original building of Krebs Tavern. That was there probably 1728. It's mentioned 1728 as they were laying out what became Big Road, and that it went by Krebs Tavern. So the war. And to our story. Entry in Daniel Royer's diary. Perhaps we see in the Town and Country, the local newspaper, Daniel Royer was an inveterate diarist. And every day for his whole life, he kept the morning 6 a.m., 12 noon, 6 p.m. temperatures. He lived in Sumneytown, and anything else that caught his interest of the day in this village of Sumneytown. It's the best diary ever. If you read the Town and Country newspaper, you may be familiar with it. Anyway, from Monday, May the 2nd, cloudy, partly cloudy at noon, increasing cloudiness towards the evening again, easterly winds, 32, 48, 40. Those are the temperatures. Paid off an old war debt to Dr. Jacoby, it being for a substitute, costing $700. The county gave 300 and 173 out of a club in which I had paid $50. The drafted clubs were popular. They were terrified of the draft. The draft came along after the Battle of Gettysburg, and most people said, enough of this. And they couldn't get recruits, so they took to drafting. People were terrified of the draft. They thought if they were drafted, they were in it for the duration. And you could buy a substitute if you had the resources to do it. Many of these substitutes would, of course, the substitute would go in, escape, go back, get substituted again, collecting $400 or $500 every time. But nevertheless, so anyway, he paid it. He had a drafted club. We know that I have documents from the New Hanover Drafted Club. It's kind of an insurance policy. A number of young men, whatever the number was, 30, 40, 50, would pay a certain amount into a pot. And if any of them got drafted, they could draw on the pot to pay for a substitute or to help to pay for a substitute. So all of this is just to say people were terrified of the draft, which is probably why William Howe signed up. And there's the, that's a substitute level, skipping over that, go on. I will skip over this too, dear sir. That is from, I suppose I should read it. It says, that is an order to arrest William Howe's friend, Augustus Bidding. He had deserted too. And it was an order to arrest Augustus Bidding, and if you arrest him, you will be paid $5. Okay. Now, the battle itself, Fredericksburg was a bad battle for the Union. It was a glorious triumph for the Confederacy. If you're familiar with this, I won't take you through it shot by shot. But the Battle of Fredericksburg was fought December 11 through 15, 1862. The Union Army's futile frontal assaults on December 13 against entrenched Confederate defenders on the heights behind the city is recorded as one of the most one-sided battles of the Civil War. Any Civil War people here are familiar with this. General Burnside was in charge of the army at that time, the Army of the Potomac. General Burnside had these huge mutton chop whiskers, which the rank and file promptly called him, instead of Burnside, they called him General Sideburn, which is where we get the name Sideburns for the mutton chop whiskers that extend down around the cheek. Well, General Sideburn, Lincoln was pressuring him to do something, attack, attack, attack. They have this huge army, do something with it. He said to one of his other generals, if you're not going to be using that army, I'd like to borrow it for a while. And so he was under pressure, and Burnside got across the river and was going to attack. And all of his officers, to a man, said, don't do it. This is not good. This is bad ground. Don't attack here. And he did anyway, and it was catastrophic. The 116th Regiment was among those ordered to assault entrenched Confederate fortifications. For some reason or other, Howe ended up in the 116th, which was the Philadelphia Irish Brigade. How he got into the win with a Philadelphia Irish Brigade is anyone's guess. It makes no sense at all. But nevertheless, that's where he ended up, and that's where he was. The 116th was a fighting brigade. That was in the battle. That was in the war from the start. And they assaulted Marye's Heights. The Confederates saw them coming, knew they were coming, had several days to prepare impregnable fortifications. As something in the publication, the press of the day said, the regiment marched into an arc of fire. Fire in the front, fire from the left and right. Shells came directly and obliquely and dropped down from above. Shells enfiladed the line, burst in front, in rear, above and behind. Shells everywhere, a torrent of shell, a blizzard of shot, shell, and fire. God help them. What will the nation owe to men who have faced these horrors? More than 200 men of the 116th. By the afternoon of December 16th, only a handful remained. It was a catastrophe. So Marye's Heights is still there. It's all under housing. It's all under housing development now. The sunken road is still there, but there's not much left to see. So anyway, Confederate General Longstreet, our musketry alone killed and wounded at least 5,000. And these, with the slaughter of the artillery, left over 7,000 killed and wounded before the foot of Marye's Hill. And that's where the 116th and William Howe was. According to Dr. Alada's book, William Howe was unwounded and continued to fight all day, retrieving ammunition from the dead and wounded. After successive futile assaults, the Union attack was called off. The wounded were left where they lay in the freezing cold all day Sunday. On Sunday night, Howe and a small group searched the battlefield in darkness and carried back the wounded of the 116th. When the army was withdrawn, Howe fought a rear guard action and then swam the freezing river to rejoin the defeated army. It might be noted, while the men were lying there freezing in the December cold, the officers were partying, celebrating getting new battle flags or something. Anyway, sometime around Christmas, 1862, Howe, sick with dysentery and unable to get admittance to a hospital, deserted and went home. He joined neighbors Augustus Bidding and Samuel Pennypacker, who had deserted before the battle. On January of 1863, there were 2,923 officers and 82,188 enlisted men absent from the Army of the Potomac alone. They simply went home. The army dissolved, and everybody went home. That was not that uncommon. If somebody was sick, it was kind of like, I'm going to go home. I'll be back when I'm better. And, oh, okay. It's kind of the way it was. It wasn't that odd, but the whole army just dissolved. There was no army after that battle. So they went home. Okay, the night callers. Locally here, David Eisenberry was an assistant special guard employed by the officer of John J. Friedley, Provost Marshal of Pennsylvania's 6th Congressional District. Coincidentally, a veteran of the 116th Regiment. Abraham Bartolet, past enrolled officer of New Hanover Township, not in the payroll, but had completed his tour of duty 2 days earlier, and Michael Wagner, enrolling officer of Frederick Township. Those three, well, Eisenberry was charged with going and arresting Bill Howe. Bill Howe apparently had a reputation. He was a good man to have on your side in a fight. They were afraid of him. They had tried to arrest him before on desertion, and it didn't go well. So they're going to go back and try again. So Eisenberry and Michael Wagner, who was the enrolling officer, interesting, as an aside, I knew Michael Wagner's son, Herbert Wagner, and spoke with him about this. He was a very old man, and back in the 1860s, I mean, the 1960s, I spoke with him about it and asked, well, of course, he was reluctant to say much, as people who are actually in war don't want to talk about it. But he said that his father, Michael Wagner, had helped to carry Bertolet home. And when Wagner arrived home, he was all covered with blood, and his mother was so frightened or scared or something. He was all covered with blood when he got home. But that was just well, I spoke with him, so now I'm old, but I'm not that old. It was fairly recent. This whole event we think is ancient history, but it wasn't that long ago. So they were afraid of it. And they went and asked Abraham Bartolet to come along. And I think a note here somewhere, that's the property that belonged to Michael Wagner. That house is still there, and it looks much like it's along Colonial Road, close to the auntie's house. It looks much like it did then. Eisenberry went to Bertolet's home to ask him to accompany him and Wagner. But when Bertolet was told it was William Howe they were going to arrest, he was reluctant to go. Elmira Sands, his wife, is reported to have said, "Yeah, Abe game it." Bertolet told his colored man to bring a horse, joking it could be used to bring his body home. So they were afraid. And to fortify themselves, early in the evening, they went to Krebs Tavern. And they were drinking there all evening. And reports were that they were dead drunk when they went to do the arrest. They went there to get courage at Krebs Tavern. About 11:30 p.m. on Sunday, June 21, 1863, at the Upper Frederick home of William Howe, pictured there. So they never, well, I'll read this letter, part of it. This is probably the truth, and this is Howe's own explanation, probably, and it probably is the truth of what happened. I'll repeat bits of this. To President Lincoln, he was arrested and sentenced to be hanged. And he wrote to President Lincoln, the reason I left the regiment was that I was not well the whole time, that I had been in service, and I could not get in no hospital. I had to do my duty like the rest that was well. And so I thought I would leave the regiment and go home till I was well again. And when I was at home about 3 months, I was near over it. And then I was going to go out again. And then my neighbors found it out, and they came to my house and told me that you had let printed in the newspapers that every deserter that would not be in his regiment till the first day of April would get shot or hung. And that made me afraid, because I was too late then. And further, they told me that I should stay home. They would fight for me before they would leave me go. And so I didn't know what to do. That's true. His neighbors, Augustus Spinning and others said, they come for you, we'll fight for you, we'll fight them. They didn't understand how the thing worked, I think. They thought it'd be like a big fist fight, and they'd beat them, and then they'd go away and never come back. They'd beat them up, and that was the end of it. And it doesn't work that way. Two, there's an ancient animosity in New Hanover. New Hanover Township at one time started at the Schuylkill River and included Pottsgrove, Lower Pottsgrove, New Hanover, and Upper Hanover. It stretched all the way to the Bucks County line. It was a big area. And there always was, not an animosity, but a feeling by those down in the more urban or sophisticated south end, where Pottstown and in South New Hanover, they always had a term for the hilly northern, or the Goshen Hop in the hilly part of the township. They called it the back end. That was the back end of the township. And there was always that, he's a back ender. And there was always that, in the back end, the land was poor and stony and hilly. The people tended to be not as well off and not as well to do. In the southern part of the township, people tended to be more well-to-do, and there was a social distinction. I mean, that went on even when public schools started. This is an aside. When public schools started, the people in the southern end of the township, in the more sophisticated end, they broke away from the New Hanover schools and they started their own schools. Also, then they didn't have to help to pay for the New Hanover schools, all of which is neither here nor there. But anyway, there was that. If they come for you, we'll fight for them. Don't go with them. They commenced to stay at home, and in the time they commenced to enroll the people for the draft. One was the enrolling officer from New Hanover Township, and the others was 2 citizens from the same township, and I lived in Frederick Township. And on Sunday night at 11 o'clock, somebody came knocking at the door, and my wife heard it, and she went, and then somebody outside said that she should open the door, and she asked what for, and she got an answer right away that he said if she would not open the door, he would push her in, and then he tried to push her in, and then my wife came running upstairs and told me, and I looked out upstairs and I seen 2 men outside, and so soon I got my gun, and then I heard them at the door again, and I seen one outside, 2, but I could not tell who he was, and then I shot at him, and then I went upstairs, and so on and so on. They started up banging on the door. They never announced who they were. They were just 3 men in the night. No, he goes, I won't read anymore. He goes on to say that one of them had a revolver and he was shooting at the house. So Howe saw the one out there, got his gun, and shot him. So there we are. Said it was through the window marked with an X that Howe leaped and made his escape after killing Captain Bertolet. And July 13, 1863, William Howe stopped at a cigar store at Allentown on his way to New York City. He was recognized by someone who knew him, who told the police a crony, Augustus Bidding, was said to be with him. He was arrested and taken to Fort Mifflin. Proves that smoking's bad for you. Anyway, they brought charges against Howe, and it was that Private William Howe, having been regularly enlisted, and so legal charges. Private William Howe, Company A, 116 Pennsylvania, volunteered on about shot. Legal charges. A court-martial was convened on November 16th in Philadelphia. Howe had no lawyer. It's questionable if he even understood the charges. He certainly didn't understand legal procedures. His only cross-examination of one of the parade of prosecution witnesses was, "Do you know if I brought those cartridges from the army?" He was found guilty and sentenced to be hanged. Ordinarily, Lincoln commuted the sentences in a situation like this. If that in a situation when someone was sentenced to be hanged, a military man for one reason or other, almost invariably Lincoln would block the execution and he'd be pardoned. In this case, he didn't, which I'll get to in a minute. On February 15th, he was retried, but with the same presiding judge, this time though with competent legal counsel, Edmund Randall, under whom Howe served at Fredericksburg. Randall's defense of Howe presented a host of mitigating circumstances. Among these were that arresting party had been drinking heavily. The arresting party never identified themselves. It was never ascertained who shot first and who was shooting from the house. Prosecution witnesses, Eisenberg and Wagner, accounts were full of inaccuracies and testimony that could not have been accurate. But the decision of the court was the same. So his unit appealed for clemency to the president. All the officers of his unit signed the letter begging clemency in Howe's case because of all the things that he had done, and it didn't matter. He wrote a letter to Lincoln. This is not his writing, but I communicate these few lines on behalf of the family of the deceased brother Abraham Bartolet, who was murdered by William Howe and so on. Bertolet's family wanted revenge. As usual, in a situation like this, Bertolet family wanted him hanged, and they were a well-connected family and politically influential. So there is that. Randall, his lawyer, was firm in belief in the client's innocence. He wrote to President Lincoln on April 30, requesting a commutation of Howe's sentence. Noting his client was free from guile and malice and the good reports of the officers of his regiment, he asked the sentence be commuted to imprisonment. Lincoln often showed clemency in military cases, except when the crimes were against civilians. On July 8, 1864, Lincoln wrote, "Sentence approved," on the transmitted documents. There's speculation that those documents never made it to Lincoln's desk, that the requests for clemency and so on were intercepted before they got to Lincoln's desk, and he never saw them. Anyway, he wrote "Sentence approved," and he was hanged on August 26th. Howe made a speech at the gallows, which was not his writing, and he said, it's the standard type of gallows speech. "Fellow soldiers and officers, I'm now but will go before God to answer," blah, blah, blah. So the consistory of Peace and Zion, that's Keeler's, refused him burial in the church cemetery. He was a deserter who shot one of the officers who came to arrest him. He was buried in a corner of his property, where he remains to this day. And there's still that sentiment that the flag, the little flag, used to be placed on his grave site, and he stopped doing that. So there he is. And that's about the story. It never should have happened this way. There were so many mitigating circumstances that he should not have been hanged, I think, but there's no getting around it. He shot somebody he was a deserter who shot somebody who came to arrest him. So how do you get around that? Well, you can't. So there we are. That's about the story. I know that Yeah, and it's not quite, it's a short story, but that's what it is. So what I don't know and was never able to research is our Hartranft exhibition out here is tremendous. And where was Hartranft during the Battle of Fredericksburg? Does anybody know? Any Civil War people that know? He was in the military. Hartranft was an officer in the military from the start. Later on in the war, he was a corps commander. That's a big deal. But I don't know where he was at Fredericksburg. A quick search on Google, a quick search in the internet was unrevealing. So I don't know. He was there somewhere, but I don't know where. It reminds me a little bit, the story reminds me of a little bit, if you saw the movie, I think it was 1980s movie, The Execution of Private Eddie Slovic. If you're familiar with that, anybody familiar with that movie? That it was another sad case. There was a soldier who desertion was rampant. At the end of the war, Germany had fallen apart. The American army was just getting into a shambles, and desertion was rife. And Eddie Slovic deserted, and he was caught and arrested, and he kind of fell. They needed to make an example of someone, and he fell right into the hands. And the military questioning, why did you run away? He said, I was afraid. And what cowardice in battle, that's a capital crime, it turns out. And they said, well, if you were put back in the army, would you run away? Oh, yes, I'd run away again. And he fell right into their hands, and they needed an example, so they shot him at firing squad as an example to the army. And this can happen to you. But he was in many respects, excuse me, he was an innocent. But so there's that. Any other comments, questions, observations, sir?
My brother and I, we lived right up the road from there. And as kids, I can remember our grandfather telling us about this.
Oh, get out.
And at that time, he said it was Daughters of the Revolution. That wouldn't have been that. It must have been some civil group that used to mow a path back through there.
Oh.
So that we could walk right back there, we could find it, no problem.
Oh.
Several years ago, I went to take my own children, couldn't find it, asked the neighbor, he did point it right away.
Right.
But if I'm not mistaken, and I haven't read reread the book in several years, but I thought in that they kind of alluded to that they didn't even really know that Howe was the one, that it was actually friendly fire. These three guys were drunk, and one of the guys, because everybody's guns were going off. And I think there was a thing that said, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Howe would have had me hanging outside almost the way that the house was built there, where they were standing underneath, he would have had me hanging outside with the gun to actually hit someone.
That could be. I don't know that story.
Just summarize.
Yes. Okay. The gentleman said that where Bertolet was shot, it would be almost impossible to shoot him from the upper story window, the upstairs window, where Howe was supposed to have shot from. And it just didn't work. And there was so much shooting going on. One of the arresting officers had a revolver that he was shooting. And it may, in fact, if even Bertolet may have been hit by friendly fire, as they say, one of the arresting officers may have shot him. That could be. Howe did shoot somewhere along the line, by his own admission. Yeah, the man who owns the property where the grave is they're both the professors of biology at Ursinus, and they're very amenable to visitors. They'll take you there, and they don't say, "Get out of my yard" type thing.
They've cleared it out much more now, the property, because you couldn't even, there was no picnic table when we were kids.
Yeah.
And they obviously expanded into the woods past the yard there.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't even see the house.
Yeah.
From the gravesite.
Yeah. So that's the story on William Howe. Things like this happen, but there's a lot of history there. Sir.
The three gentlemen who went to his house, what was their exact title? Would they be like, they were sort of constables or what was their?
Yeah, the one was the enrolling officer. It was by congressional district. And in each congressional district, there would be a provost marshal whose job it would be to keep order among soldiers who were home or who weren't with their unit. The provost marshal was in charge of the military, soldiers that were enrolled in the military when they were home and in that area. For deserters, he would get $5 a head, $5 if he'd catch them and bring them back. So $5 is a lot of money. And so there was that. It was kind of a political job. And Michael Wagner was the enrolling officer for Upper Frederick Township. And Bertolet went along just as a volunteer. He went along because they asked him to go along. But it went by. Correct. They were not military. They were citizens commissioned by the military to keep order in the congressional district among the soldiers who were home for whatever reason. The provost marshals eventually morphed into the military police. So, yes.
Do you know the current street address of the home where he lived?
I do not. I can point it out on Google or something. I know exactly where it is. I don't know, like.
Snyder Road from the park.
Yep.
Okay, before you get to Howe.
Yep.
Which you come up the hill and you go down the little valley. It's the first house on the right before you get to Howe Road.
Yes, it sits down below the level of the road.
You won't see it too easily heading.
Correct.
that way, but from the-
Oh, so it's on the right. Okay.
Frequently, there are political lawn signs out.
Yeah, I never read it.
Political lawn signs. Yes, they're very agreeable to visitors. Sir,
In the early 2000s, the some being veterans of the Civil War, but can't, I belong to, we tried to get to the graveyard memorial and took it back.
excellent.
So, during that period of time, I want to say 2008 to 2012, there was a person who used to write into the Mercury about the fact he was very disturbed about the fact flags that they put on the grave to deserve. And have you ever heard that story?
Yeah, I've heard of.
It was
Yeah.
very disturbed about the whole situation. And she would go up and make flags off.
Huh.
And then she would sort of like get my holder out of it. And she would write to the Mercury. And we had a number of our camp members who really didn't understand that whole situation about and so he took it upon himself to do as much research information on how. And he even organized a trip for our camp to move down to Fort Mifflin and toured down the underground.
Right. Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
and some stuff that Fort Mifflin had about. He was able to also make copies of that. And unfortunately, he passed away, but our camp disbanded because some of the older members had passed away that had found them again. And so in the process, somehow I can hold on to this whole research information. So when I was all getting redundancy, and I had it at home, I was really going through it. We would have a meeting, and he would say, did you see that article that, Mercury getting genes all upside down this thing? Because
That's right. Well, surely not.
Surely not. It was an interesting time period, to go back and visit, because everybody would go back. The flag will be gone, and put a new flag on, and someone will check them out later. Flag will be gone, this person will everything, someone put the flag in the grave. So, I didn't really ever heard this.
I did. I heard the story that, yeah, that, The story that I'd heard was that the American Legion was putting flags in the grave, and then they stopped because he was a deserter. But that's not the story. So, okay, yeah, I'd certainly be like interested in that box, and maybe some things I can photograph and work into this presentation here, so I don't have so much text in it, have more pictures. Yeah. Incredible. I mean, people don't understand. If there were the Congressional Medal of Honor at Battle of Fredericksburg, he deserved it. And he got hanged. So, yes, sir.
In your experience, this instance, the church refused burial in her.
Yes.
This situation. Is that common practice for churches at the time that they would refuse burial for some scandalous type of thing that happened?
I can't give other examples. My guess, and knowing local history a little bit as I do, my guess would be that would not be uncommon.
Can you say what's not uncommon?
Yeah, the question was, is it common at that time not to refuse burial to people in members of the church because of some sort of transgression, a moral transgression, or some such thing? And I can't cite any other examples of it locally here, but my guess is it was not uncommon.
Moral transgressions, I mean, you know, St. Philip, I
Yeah.
don't know now, but our church, they had a whole area reserved for suicides. They couldn't be buried in the rest of the ground.
Yeah.
And that's not being practiced anymore.
Yeah.
Suicides were kept in regular church grounds. So yeah, I think that a lot.
I think it's probably happened a lot. The church council owned the ground, and they could do whatever they wanted, I guess.
Is this piece of Zion church you're talking about?
Yes. No, it's Keeler's. Keeler's was a Union church, Lutheran and Reformed. At one time, the Reformed split off and formed Peace and Zion. That was the Reformed, and the Keeler's that stayed there, that was the Lutheran.
And this is on the Lutheran's site.
Yes, Keeler's, it's on the Lutheran site, but it was Lutheran and Reformed at that time.
You know anything about her, his family? He was only 38.
Yeah, well, as I had there in the beginning, his widow had 2 children.
Oh,
She moved to Norristown along with the children, and I don't know if any of those children had children. The story kind of stops there. If his children had children, they're lost to history now.
They had children.
Did they? How do you know? What's that?
We are some.
You are some of them. Well, that would explain it. Okay, that's a strong case. That's a strong argument. What's your story?
My grandmother's maiden name is Ruth Howe.
Okay,
Her father's, which would be her grandfather's name, was William Howe. He was William H. Howe or William something Howe.
My mom's dad was William Jonas Howe, whose father was Clayton Howe, married Elizabeth. I didn't write the name down. Her father was John Henry, and his father was William. So we have quite a lineup.
Pretty sure.
Yeah.
yeah, pretty sure.
Yeah.
You
We
go,
have some things maybe you didn't really see that.
sure. Okay. So he had children and they had children.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Have you about the GAR, since you had the GARs, the grade?
I don't know. The GAR, Grand Army of the Republic, that's a Revolutionary War marker. Somebody may have just put it there and used it. And answer your question, I don't know. I never heard of, it would have to have been William Howe's grandfather or something. I'm wrong. Sorry, I'm wrong. GAR is Civil War.
Yeah, that was the
organization.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, that's right. Yes. Right, right, right.
Locations that they had these, like the American Legion, they did the
Yes,
building, you know, locations and that.
yes, you're right. I don't know. But that's the story in a nutshell. It never should have happened. He never should have been hanged. And the whole thing was kind of a botch from the start. And it can happen. I'm sure it happens today. So it's something to be aware of. Now, if there are no other questions or observations, yeah, I'd be interested in seeing, whatever you have somewhere along the line. And well, thank you all for coming.